back to Chicago. She never married. She was engaged once. I remember coming home from school, and I knew she was going to be coming to our house for the weekend, I think it was. And she and my mother were going to make wedding dresses and bridesmaid. My mother was to be her bridesmaid. And I walked in the house, and there was a guy laying on the living room floor. And Carol introduced him as her fiance. I think his name was Leonard. I never saw Leonard upright all that weekend. He was always laying on the floor, usually asleep. Needless to say, it didn't last. I asked my mother whatever happened to Leonard, and she says, I don't know, and don't ask Aunt Carol, he broke her heart. So that was her adventure into romance, and she was happy to live the way she did. She always had children, but they weren't her own. She never had her own, but the world's children were hers. If she heard of some problem somewhere, she'd be there to help. Carol had some health problems eventually, and one day we got a message that she had gone home and collapsed. Now, she always had cats, 3, 4 of them around at a time, because she could leave them for a weekend and so forth and drive to Minnesota and come back, and they were still there. But they weren't much help to her as she was in a coma on the floor. And we're not sure exactly how long she laid there, but somebody eventually called the fire department. I think it was her friend Doris, had tried to get a hold of Carol and couldn't. And I guess they kicked the door in and found her laying on the floor. Oh, she was still alive, but just barely. She took her to the hospital where they called the nearest of kin, which would be in Minnesota. And everybody was looking to make a quick trip to Chicago, and then they got a phone call that Carol had passed away. After that, it became up to the legal people. We knew she had a will, and I knew my sister was the oldest of Carol's nieces, so she was the executor. And Carol, my sister, got in contact with Carol's lawyer who had drawn up the will, and he suggested that she come to Chicago, which she did. And we found out a couple of things. First of all, Carol had more money than anybody ever expected because she was very generous. She had taken some of my cousins on trips, traveled to Europe, took which had to cost her quite a bit. And the Christmas presents, she was always very generous. But, so we never expected her to have any money. But what the lawyer found out was that from the very first time she started teaching school in Chicago, her first job, she had started a payroll deduction program buying municipal bonds. Now, I can't imagine how much they cost her, but she had this program her whole working life. And in her will, it said any money that she had left after payment of whatever funeral costs and so forth was to be split evenly with her sister, my mother, and her 4 brothers. Now, we're talking it was about $500,000. Evidently, municipal bonds of Chicago were worth their weight in gold, and they were however many working years, 40 or 50 years that she'd been putting money into the city of Chicago. So in death, Carol even was helping people. Now, my mother was in a nursing home by then, and the expenses of somebody in a nursing home, and it was a nice one, my dad had set up a program for her, and it was working, except that we were running out of money. She had diabetes and several other things, and her medication bills were close to $1,000 a month. So her money was running out real quick, and I was kind of worried about it. I was, I guess, the executor for my mother while she was in the nursing home. And her brothers also, most of them were in a nursing home. I think all but one were in a nursing home, and I'm sure their money was running out. So this amounted to about $100,000 a piece. What a windfall. And I'm not sure if Carol even knew how much she had. My sister, as being the oldest of her nieces and so forth, and she was quite close to Carol too, she had decided to have 2 funerals, since Chicago was Carol's home for all these years. But she was going to be buried in Minnesota, which was also her home, her original home. So Janice arranged 2 funerals. She had one in Chicago for all of her friends and so forth that were there. And I guess it turned out to be quite big. And also arranged a funeral here in Minnesota. And she was going to be buried here also. I was a pallbearer in the funeral, and I noticed at the funeral there was a younger lady, not real young, I would guess she was maybe 30 years old or so, was there, a black girl. And the girl also went to the cemetery, and later on, after the visit to the cemetery, we all met back at the church for a lunch, and this girl was there again, and I asked my sister if she knew who that was. She didn't know him, but she said she was also curious. The girl was all alone, not talking to anybody, and I said, well, let's go talk to her. And we went over, and I said, hi. And I started to introduce myself and my sister, and the girl interrupted and said, yeah, you're Janice and you're Skip. Oh, now you've really got an advantage over us. You know who we are, but we don't know who you are. And she went on to tell this story. She said her mother had been born in the projects, and a black girl born in the projects doesn't really have too much of a chance in life. Career-wise, you have a choice of either being a drug dealer or a prostitute. Her mother wanted out. She wanted to start a good, clean life. And she was a young girl with no money and no prospects. Carol gave the girl $1,000 initially, And the girl went to secretarial school, learned shorthand and bookkeeping and all those skills, and got an apartment out of the projects. With this education, she was able to get a good, honest job, married a man out of the projects, and had a daughter, which was the girl we were talking to. She said, our mother considered your aunt a saint. She broke a trend, got the family out of the projects and into a good life. And she says, Mother has been taken sick herself, but she insisted I get her to your aunt's funeral in Chicago. And I had to promise her that I'd come to Minnesota also to give her our best and at the funeral. Later on, Janice and I talked about that, and we thought, Carol never mentioned this. A lot of people would do good things, but then they take credit for it. How many others do you suppose lives Carol entered and helped in some way? I don't know. But in retrospect, when somebody asked me who a hero in my life would be, I think it would be my Aunt Carol. She lived her life as she wanted and helped so many people, all these little children that she saw that they got a good education, and all the other people that we don't know about. God bless you, Carol.